thousands of babies to go to a career in politics?
Question. Before I answer that very difficult question, I want to introduce two of my family members with me today. I have two granddaughters sitting over here. 18 grandchildren, their sisters, Lisa and Linda. We had a big weekend in Texas this weekend. Their oldest sister got married, and we more or less brought our family together. We had our Christmas all together. And most of them live in the Lake Jackson area, where we live. But one came from Fort Worth, who practices medicine. But another son came in from Kentucky. You may have heard his name. His name is Rand. So the question was, what made me give up medicine to go into politics? And other times people ask me that question, what would you rather be called? Would you rather be called congressman or doctor? And I said, well, you know, doctors are still more popular than politicians. But you know, I never made that decision because I always loved medicine. I wanted to go into medicine. I went into what I thought was the happiest part of medicine, which was delivering new life. And but I got fascinated with studying economics, trying to figure out why the world seems to be so mixed up about why do we have recessions and depressions and inflations and all these problems. So I came across Austrian Economics. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. That's free markets. And there was an explanation there which I sort of got convinced of, and the convictions were always correct. So in the 1970s, early 1970s, Richard Nixon had suspended the gold standard, got rid of the gold standard, and ushered in the age of economics that we have today. He says, we're all Keynesians now, man. We're all liberal, and we all endorse the idea that government should run the economy. And that disturbed me a whole lot, so I figured that I had studied this economics, and I thought, well, I just want to talk about it and get it off my chest and see if anybody would listen. And in 1974, nobody wanted to run as a Republican, especially in Texas, because then we only had 3 Republican congressmen. So I thought, well, I'll just do this as a lark and run. My wife told me at that time, she said, don't do it. She said, that could be very dangerous. How can running for Congress be dangerous? She says, you're liable to get elected. You know? And I assured her I would not get elected because my politics would be different, and it wouldn't be all the false promises and the pretense and all this. I wanted to tell people what I really thought was happening and why we were in for some problems in the future. But it turned out that that was the case. I lost the first time, and then the next, shortly thereafter, the incumbent congressman, a Democrat, resigned. It was a special election, which made special conditions for running. It's a little easier to win a special. So I ran in '76 and won that. But I wasn't really content to be in politics. I was there until I was in there 3.5 terms. And decided I'd go back to medicine. I went back to Texas, practiced medicine for another 12 years. And then in 1994, I thought, maybe they're seeing the light, you know, maybe they're serious about cutting. But I was fooled. They were not very serious, but I ran in '96 and was reelected at that time. But the issue that really drove me the most was personal liberty, because I believe if you understand that, you will believe property rights and free markets and contracts sound money in our Constitution. But it was the technicalities of economics, and especially in monetary policy, that I thought was so important. And that's why I do talk about monetary policy. Every once in a while I mention the Fed. Every once in a while I think we say, audit the Fed, you know. So those are the kind of things that drove me. And lo and behold, we are now at a position where our economic system is really very precarious worldwide. And as a consequence of what happened in the early 1970s, the events we're having today were actually inevitable.
So I think now it's on. So sticking with the economic theme, so you've proposed a budget recently that is going to balance the budget in 3 years, a plan to balance the budget in 3 years and cut $1 trillion the first year out of spending. Could you help us understand how cutting government spending actually will help the economy?
Yes, we got into our problem because the government spent too much. Every dollar the government spends, you don't get to spend. Even when the government borrows it, it is a cost to you. And even if the government prints it, it's a cost to you because it's a distortion of the economy. It dilutes the value of your money and your prices go up and it causes the business cycle. So the problem comes about when governments get too big. The people actually think, well, the government will, I want this, the government will give it to me. You never ask the question, who's the government? So if you want something, and they have to pay, they're the government. So, you know, nothing comes for free. But if a rich country can do this for a good while, and we were a very rich country because we were the freest country, we had the largest middle class, and we got away with this for many, many decades.
Oil.
But once it was permitted that there was no limits on how much money the government could print, that meant that governments would promise just about everything, and that's when we embarked on deciding to be the policemen of the world. Even though the Cold War ended, there was no hesitation. As a matter of fact, it was accelerated. And there was never a cost. But what happens though, when the economy gets distorted, the production and productivity is diminished. Jobs go overseas and prices go up, and so there's not as many people you can tax. And then you can live by borrowing for a while, and then eventually you have to print the money and you cause this. So the problem is spending, and the problem is dealing with debt. If an individual gets into trouble like this, and you can't get any more credit cards, and all you have is debt, you're not going to have any economic growth because you'll just be paying interest on your debt. And I'm sure a lot of people know about this because just the interest will, you can't even get your credit card debt down. So businesses can get like that, but to clean that up and get your own economic growth back again, you have to get rid of the debt. You have to maybe sell some stuff, back off, live a little bit less exuberantly, and when the debt goes down, then you can have economic growth again. Some people declare bankruptcy, but some people just work hard and pay the debt down. Governments are a little bit different, but the principle's the same. Governments will, keep borrowing, and then as long as the people who hold the debt will take our money, they'll keep printing the money. And since we were given this privilege of printing the money, because our dollar used to be as good as gold, and that's how the dollar became the reserve of the world, but when they took away the gold, we still got to print the money. So it was much easier for us to export our money and buy all the stuff that we want and not have to work for it. And then our jobs went overseas. So we have to live within our means. We have to pay down the debt, and that's why the first year I proposed that we cut $1 trillion out of the budget. And where I would start, because I think it's the easiest place to cut, is look at the overseas expenditures. We're doing way too much overseas. We should stop it and start bringing our troops home. There will have to be others cuts, obviously. And at least 5 departments go back to 06 budgeting. And within 3 years, you can have the budget balanced. But some people, get pretty nervous about that. And the people who should really get nervous are those who are ripping us off by getting the bailouts, because the bailouts would have to quit. No more bailouts for big banks. If you restore a sound economy and restore our individual freedoms, there shouldn't be anything to be frightened about. It means that taxes would either be very low or would work for the day where we don't even have an income tax. That's not much of a sacrifice. I think that should be a blessing if you got to keep everything you earn. But you would have to shrink the size of government. Government doesn't follow the Constitution at all. Most everything that has ever come to the House floor since I've been there has not been technically constitutional. That's why I had to vote no a lot of times. They just weren't part of the government. So if we got into this trouble because the politicians were willing to vote and the people wanted these things, they thought this would last forever, actually going back to a sensible policy isn't that complicated. All we need are people that go to Washington who will uphold their oath of office and obey their oath to follow the Constitution.
So you talk about debt a lot, and you just spoke about debt a lot. So and I know we're all watching the turmoil in Europe right now, and the conversations about debt and everything. Do you see parallels between what's going on in Europe and what's happening in the United States today?
There's a lot of parallels, but there's also an interconnection that's very important, because the world is made up of a debt bubble, which is based on the dollar. For instance, if we spend $10 billion in China right now, they take our money, and that was money really created out of thin air. So it looks on the surface as a benefit because we export money and we get some goods back. But what China does is they take that, they monetize our dollar, and they print their yuan, and they have the same type of bubble. So the bubbles are worldwide. It's never happened in the history of the world that a paper money was so disseminated around the whole world. So all Europe is engulfed, and some countries a lot worse than others. But the banks have an interest. In Europe, the banks would buy the debt of Greece, and then we would have branches on those banks. So even in 2008, when Europe was in trouble as we were, everybody got bailed out by the creation of money. The Fed created up to $15 trillion, sent a lot of money over to Europe in secret because under the conditions we're not allowed to know what's going on. They bailed them out, but the banks are the ones who get bailed out. The people of Greece don't get bailed out. The banks get to bail out because Greece can't pay the banks anymore. But what happens is the Fed buys this bad debt, as they did in 2008. They bought the mortgage debt. So the debt of the big guys get dumped on the people, and even to the point where over $7 trillion just went to Europe in 2008. And we're lined up over there. So it's very much interconnected, and they'll make a case for saying, well, if we don't, it's going to get worse, worse, worse. And it gets worse for the bankers. By bailing out the bankers who said, no, if we don't bail them out in 2008, there's going to be a major crisis. And there would have been a major problem, there's no doubt about it. But it would have been mostly on them, not you. They bought it, and our taxes used it. We end up with the debt. The middle class lost their jobs. And the people we were supposed to be helping by these housing programs and easy credit, they've lost their houses. So it's a pretense to help the middle class, but actually under these conditions of destruction of money, and when the lobbyists are able to control the government, it really jeopardizes the middle class. When you have a free society and a sound currency, you have a large middle class. And we, at a period in our history, had the biggest middle class and the wealthiest middle class in the history of the world. Not anymore. Our middle class is shrinking. The rich are getting richer, but the middle class is shrinking. It's characteristic, it's predictable under these circumstances. That's why it has to be reversed. That's why I take the bold stand of saying this has to be broken up. We have to quit printing the money, quit bailing out their friends, and liquidate this debt. Get the problems behind us, and it means cutting. But quite frankly, I think the alternative, people say, well, there has to be these adjustments, and they get a little nervous, because it would take about a year to get back on our feet again. If we did that, we would be over it by now. But if we don't do it, the alternative is so much worse, because we will continue to spend. Just like now, anybody on a fixed income is getting behind the 8 ball right now. Because although the Social Security checks still go out, they might go up a little bit every once in a while, they do not keep up with inflation. So the real funds that retired people are getting, they're going down. So it's actually shrinking, and that is uncontrollable. Price increases as a consequence of the devaluation of the currency, and some prices go up faster than others, but ultimately the prices really can wipe out the middle class. So if you think of the runaway inflations in Central America, Mexico, Zimbabwe, and Germany, it's the middle class that gets wiped out. And we're seeing the early stages of that. And that is why spending cuts are crucial in living within our means.